And then also yesterday, if you signed up, we had, so if you had signed up yesterday, Sherry sent out the slides there was only like 2 handouts with them. If you did not get them, they are located in other documents under training slides and handouts. And what we sent was, again, the slides. It's 3 per page. And then we have, if you need the 1 per page, they are also in there. We just send out the notes pages. And then we also gave you a comparison sheet, which I don't have that with me right now, but it's a comparison of all the provisions. And then we also gave you links to, this is the provision 2 guidance, which it actually talks about provision 3 in here as well. And then we have the CEP guidance. We gave you the links to those. So if you copy and paste those links into your internet browser, it'll take you straight to USDA. We have them also, we have a provisions section. It's called CEP/provision. We have a section in other documents. So if there is anything that you need or want to look at regarding provision, it is located there. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and just let you know. So it looks like the majority of the people we have on today are already on provision or CEP, but we have several people that are thinking about going provision. So this is a great one to go to because we're going to talk about all the provisions, what they are, and the differences between them. And again, most of you will be CEP or provision 2. To be honest with you, we were talking because we have provision 1, 2, 3, and CEP that we'll be talking about today. And in all honesty, nobody in the United States is on provision 1. So we really don't know why it's still in existence. They haven't been in several years. And then provision 3 is going away, it seems like, as well. I was just kind of, when I was doing research on this a couple of years ago, and actually even recently, we did this training one other time right before COVID. And then COVID happened, so nobody went CEP or provision. But a lot of the states are not even talking about provision 3 anymore, but we will be discussing all of them. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So again, we're going to be going over the types of provision, which is provision 1, provision 2, provision 3, and CEP. But again, the majority are on 2 or CEP. Most of you do know what a CEP, but it is called Community Eligibility Provision. It is a provision. So anytime we see the word provision, CEP is always included in that. And some other things that some people get confused about, and I'll tell you too, with some of the provisions, like I'll tell you something that kind of gets all over me, especially I think our program field specialists, and they're on here as well, which is our consultants. They're now called program specialists, is even though you're on a provision, and we're going to talk about what provision is, but you are still required to like meet meal patterns, you keep records. Like a lot of people think, well, I'm on CEP, I don't have to keep records, but you still do. This just has to deal with a different way of counting and claiming and not having to have applications every year. That's what this means. But everything else, meal pattern requirements, subgroups, record keeping, like having meal counts, that still applies to everybody, not just, but we would get that, I kind of get it a lot. It'd be like, but I'm on CEP, but it's like, yes, but you still have to do paperwork. You still have to do it. It's just a little bit less paperwork that you have to do. So again, what is provision? It is an effort to reduce paperwork at your local level. So with the school lunch program, there are, again, 4 provisions that we will be talking about, and it regards around free, reduced, and paid meals. Again, it's where you won't have to take applications. All the kids will be eating for free, but depending on the provision, you still have to claim by either free, reduced, or paid. So that, even though the kids are eating free, you still claim, and we'll talk about percentages and stuff like that. But people think that, oh, well, because the kids are all free, that we claim for free. And I can't stress enough, that's not the case. Just because the kids eat for free does not mean that that you claim everybody for free, like on SSO. It's not like that at all. But we will go through each one, and I'll let you know how you do the claiming. But again, you will be claiming by free, reduced, or paid in some sort of aspect. But just because the kids eat for free does not mean that they are all claimed as free. So just so you're aware of that. So who should consider going on a provision? Well, if you have high free and reduced, and I understand last year was hard, especially getting free and reduced back, but we're going back to regular counting and claiming next year. So we're going back to regular how we did things. So again, when you get and think about a little bit before you started COVID, again, that's been 2 years. It's kind of hard having this 2-year break, or probably a 1.5 year break. But if you have high free and reduced, it's suggested, and I will even give you my own honest opinions. Like even when I was in the field, I would tell people like, this is what I would suggest your free and reduced rate to be in order to go provision. Because even though you may have a high free and reduced rate, it still may not be where you want it to be. Because we'll talk about funding here in just a moment. If the majority of your student population is on the direct cert list, that's another good way to go on provision. And if you are non-pricing, if you're already not charging your students, you might as well not keep quite as much paperwork. And I did have a couple of schools that were completely non-pricing. They never charged, but every year they did the application process with their parents. So if you're just a non-pricing school, to me, I would definitely go provision because it would just save you some paperwork. Okay, so again, why do schools choose to go on? It is paperwork reduction. You do not have to send out applications every year. So that can be a cost saving in the fact of the paper, because every year you're not sending out, you have to buy the paper to put the application on. You also have to have people to approve applications. So you do have a reduction in paperwork when it comes to that. Again, the paper cost and labor cost. And again, it does allow children to eat meals at no charge. So they eat meals at no charge, but they still will be claimed versus free, reduced, and paid. And so we got a good question about our direct certification count was 90.4% of total population. Can we continue provision 2 without doing another base year? Direct certification is different than applications. What I would say is if you will be at certain points required to kind of do a new base year depending on the provision. But if your numbers are higher than before, I would do a base year. But the good thing is if you have 90% of your kids on direct certification, that means you would have to get very little applications. So I would say contact our office and we can talk to you more about your specific school when it comes to that. But if you ever notice that your numbers, like your free and reduced gets higher, I would definitely want to suggest you reestablish a base year because it just gives your claiming higher. And that's kind of what you want is the claiming higher. So when it comes to what you can and cannot be done on provision, I'm going to try and stay with my slides because I'll get ahead of myself. I do it quite often and I still will, but so meal counts are still required to be taken at the point of service. So if you're on provision 1, which we don't have anybody on provision 1, you still take meal counts by type, free, reduced, and paid, just like you would any normal counting and claiming year. Now, provision 2, 3, and CEP, you don't have to take it by if the kid's free, reduced, or paid. You just take an actual meal count. So you just saw that 53 kids went through the line and got a reimbursable meal. But you don't have to know if they were free, reduced, or paid children. Only on provision 1 do you have to do that. You still have to keep an edit check, but it is a modified one. And again, we see this a lot. And it doesn't matter if you're on SSO, it doesn't matter if you're on provision. You cannot make a child take a plate. You can't force them and say, take a plate and then go throw it away. You can't do that. If a kid does not want a meal, you cannot force them to take one. We have seen it, but you cannot force a child to take a tray. Okay, now let's go through the actual types of provision. So we talked about like, what is provision? Why do people go on provision? But let's talk about the differences. I'm just gonna briefly tell you about provision 1. It only is a 2-year period. Again, no one in the United States is on it, and there's reasons for that. Provision 2 is a 4-year cycle with a possible extension. Provision 3 is the same. It's a 4-year cycle with possible extensions. And then CEP is a 4-year cycle, no extensions. You may have a possible 5th year with a grace period, and we're going to talk about what that is. So when we talk about provision 2 and provision 3 being a 4-year cycle with possible extensions, what that means is if your area, so you go on provision 2 or provision 3, and in this 4 years, we look at this economic thing that we get from USDA. I think it's USDA. We get this economic deal. And if your area is still within the same guidelines or within a percentage of what it was, then you can continue provision 2 or provision 3. We've had some schools on provision 2 or 3 for like 20 years before they reestablished a base year. But again, we had a lot of people reestablish a base year around 2010 because a lot of people's, their numbers went way, they could tell their numbers were going to go way higher than it did in the 90s. But with CEP, you can't just stay with the same numbers for 20 years. That doesn't apply with CEP. You have to reestablish every 4 to 5 years. No exceptions. But with provision 2 and provision 3, we've had schools on it for 20 or 30 years on the same provision with the same base year. But again, I would highly suggest to you, if your numbers are higher now than what they were when you did reestablish or when you had a base year, I would definitely reestablish with the higher numbers. We had a lot of schools that did that in 2010 to 2012 area. So it applies to all provisions that, again, all children eat for free. However, you still have to claim them based on free, possibly reduced, and paid rates. And even in the base year. In base year, all kids have to eat for free. Direct certification still has to be pulled at least 1 time per year for all provisions. Verification report still has to be done, even though you don't do verification in your other years, in your regular provision years, there's parts of the verification report you have to fill out. And the district must, so this is for all provisions. The district must pay the difference between federal reimbursement and the cost of providing meals at no charge with non-federal funds if costs are not covered by child nutrition. So with being on a provision, if you're not making the funds that you need to, then your general fund has to cover the cost for child nutrition. So provision 1, again, I'm going to briefly talk about this. You have to have at least 80% of your children enrolled be free or reduced. Children who qualify for free or reduced can be served at no charge. But again, you still have to take meal counts by free, reduced, or paid. All other households must provide a meal application. And again, no school in the United States is using this. So that's why it's just very quick to the point. No one's doing it. We would never suggest you do it. It's a lot of work for like a year. And there's a lot of better. Provision 2 and CEP, to be honest, are the 2 better of all the provisions. So with provision 2, what you do is during the first year, this is what's called your base year. And that base year, there is no change in your procedures. So you still receive applications, you still do verification, you still do all of that in your base year. But after your base year, in the following 3 years, you do not have to take applications. What that base year does is you have your free, reduced, and paid kids. And everybody does eat for free in the base year, but you still have to get the applications, and you just tell families, hey, you still get to eat for free. It's just, we have to have this application back. And if you, you can tell them, like, if you don't, we may have to go, if you don't get all the applications back, that we may have to go back to charging. A good question about what is a non-pricing district. All the non-pricing district is you do everything that you're supposed to do. You get applications every year, you do verification, you do everything, but you just don't charge your kids. Everybody eats for free, but you still claim. It's all it is with non-pricing. That's why we would tell you to go with provision, because why do all the paperwork every single year when you could not do paperwork like in provision 2? You do paperwork the first year, but then you don't take any applications, do the whole verification process the next 3 years. So not all costs are paid out of general fund. The district pays for those meals. You're still claiming them, yes, but you still do claim them free, reduced, and paid. It's just if there's any differences, then general fund has to pay the rest. And that goes for any provision, not just on pricing. It's also for provision. So what you do in that base year is you're getting these applications, and every month you're claiming free, reduced, and paid, just like you would any other year, even though your kids are eating for free in that base year. What happens in every year following that is you don't take applications, but what you do is when you claim, you're claiming, and I'll show you an example. I do have an example in here that I'll show you how it kind of works. But at district, you can use applications, you can use direct certification. You would do what you would normally do in a normal year for that base year. Again, reimbursement during these years is determined by percentages of free, reduced, and paid. So the example that we have for this is if in the base year, in the month of August, and you have your lunch percentages. So in that month, you had 81% of your kids that ate were free, 4% were reduced, and 15% were paid. So every August, while you're on that provision 2, you'll tell us your total meal counts for the month. And so here we have 1534. And what you will do is you'll claim 81% of those free, 4% of those would be reduced, and 15% would be paid. And it does it for every single month. So August might be 81% were free, 4% were reduced, and 15% were paid. Maybe in September, you had, 80% of your kids were free, 5% were reduced at 8, and 15% or 15% were, it may change every month, whatever your percentage is. So every month, every year of your provision, and every August, it's the same percentage. Every September, it's the same percentage, but we only need your total meal counts, and then we'll tell you what your percentage is of how to claim that. So again, provision 2 is by percentages by each month claimed in the base year. Your base year is what gives you all your records for every year after that. And again, each month's percentages will probably be just a little bit different because a lot of the kids do eat consistently, but some don't. So you may have higher free 1 month, higher paid 1 month, higher reduced numbers in 1 month. Now, provision 3 is a little bit different than provision 2. Provision 2 is the most popular when it comes to these provisions 1, 2, and 3. In year 0 is known as your base year. So base year for provision 2, you take everything, you do what you would normally do in any other school year, take applications, do verification, that's your base year. Now base year, and then year number 1 starts your regular traditional no applications. Year 0 in provision is your base year. There is no change in your traditional procedures and administrative burden. And in the following 4 years, there's no applications that get taken. The district can use, again, applications and direct certification to approve your students, just like you would in provision 2. The difference is like what the state agency will tell you what to claim each month. The reimbursement during these years is determined by applying percentages, again, of free, reduced, and paid. Provision 3, I was actually taught not to really learn provision 3 because we were really trying to get away from it. It allows a school to receive a comparable level of federal cash and commodity assistance as the school receives in the last year in which free and reduced eligibility determinations were made. So that would be for provision 3, would that be 2019, 2020? When they got applications then? So that's provision 3 would go by your comparable level of your federal cash flow and commodity assistance in 2019, 2020. That's so crazy. It is adjusted for your enrollment, inflation, and operating days if applicable. So for each of the 4 years, the level of your federal cash commodity support is adjusted to reflect changes in enrollment and inflation. So provision 3 can get really hard. The thing about provision 3 is you take meal counts. Now I'm going to explain this the best I can because I don't really even understand it a whole lot, but I do know it can really hurt a school or it can really help a school. It can really hurt a school because you're kind of claiming the same meals all the time. And if you have increased enrollment, which we had a school that this happened, they had increased enrollment and they were losing a lot of money because provision 2 is more in line with your enrollment, but provision 3, it's kind of like a set number. But if your enrollment goes higher, then you could lose money because you're actually serving more meals than you're claiming. It's kind of a really weird deal. That's why we really get away from provision 3, and we really suggest you go to provision 2. Because again, we've had some schools that have lost a lot of money on provision 3. So that's why I mostly know about provision 2 and CEP, because those are the ones that we really did focus with. Community eligibility is the last one. Direct certification is the only thing that counts for CEP. So direct certification it's that information that you get from the wave. You have to, the document, or it could be from another source, another state agency. So maybe you contact DHS for a foster list. Maybe you contact a tribe and you get their FIDPER list. But you cannot get any documentation from a parent. Everything has to come from a state agency. So the direct certification list, or again, you can use, if you have contacts at a tribe, you can get the FIDPER list. And if you have a contact at DHS, they can get you a foster list. Household applications are not allowed to be taken, and students are claimed by free and by paid percentages. So again, everybody is eating for free, but you claim by free and paid. There's just no reduced. You don't claim any reduced. Provision 2 and provision 3, you do claim reduced. But provision 3 CEP, you do not claim for reduced. So if you do have a lot of reduced kids, CEP may not be a good option for you. So with CEP, to be eligible, with provision 2, it's done by site. So you could have your elementary school, your middle school, your high school. Each one is done by site for provision 2 or provision 3. CEP can be done by site. It can be done in a group, or it can be done by district. But you must have what's called identified student percentages, which we call an ISP, of at least 40% as of April 1st or in April. So of the school year prior to implementing CEP. So that's why we wanted to do this now before April hits, to see if you want to do CEP for next year. But you have to have at least 40% to even qualify for CEP. And if you were that low, if you were that low, to be honest with you, I would suggest maybe you would want to go to provision 2 instead, because you may be able to pick up the difference between CEP and provision 2. I personally like provision 2, and the reason why is because provision 2, you get to use direct cert list, you get to use applications from parents, you get to use everything. With CEP, you can only use direct cert. So if you have, I had a school when I was in the field. They were probably 95% free and reduced. However, they were only 30% directly certified. And the reason for that is because a lot of their kids were free based on application. So you think about that. And then also, if you have a lot of kids that are reduced, you would be missing that out as well. So that might be why provision 2 might be a better option for you if you have a lot of kids that are free based on application. And again, remember, provision 2, you can stay on that for say 20 years if your economic situation in your community stays around the same. But CEP, you have to redo your numbers every 4 years. So if you want to go on CEP this upcoming year, or you have to redo your base year, we would tell you to pull your direct cert list after April 6th or 7th. And the reason why is just in case there's ever glitches, because that's always the possibility, but we and DHS, we do our matches on the first Monday of the month, and that would be the 4th. So you may want to wait just a couple of days. And we only match one time per month. So you have to pull your list in April, but we would suggest if you pull it, make sure it's after the 6th or the 7th, just to make sure, just in case there were any glitches. As a reminder, if you have any students that have an exit date before April 1 on your direct cert list, it cannot count towards the number of kids on your DC list. So I had been to a school that they wanted to do CEP when they kind of told me their numbers before I went out there. It's a very small school, maybe 100 kids. And they're like, we have 56 kids. I think they had 100 kids, and they're like, we have 56 kids on a direct cert list. Well, when I went out there, they did not remove the kids that had dropped. So just because you have 56 kids on your direct cert list, when did they drop? You have to consider that. And what happened is they had probably 15 to 20 kids that were not there in April. So we had to remove them, and they did not qualify for CEP. So make sure you take that in consideration. If you have kids that drop before April, it shows up on the direct cert list when a child drops. Just because you have 200 kids on your direct cert list does not mean all 200 kids qualify. If there's an exit date before April, those kids have to be removed from your direct cert list. Now, enrollment. So what we do is it's your direct cert list, and we need your enrollment. We need a roster of all your enrolled students in the school serving both school lunch and school breakfast. We do have some schools that don't do breakfast. A child must have access to at least one meal service per day to be considered enrolled. And it needs to be the enrollment in April. Again, it needs to be around the same time frame as when you pull your DC list. Again, any child that has dropped that is no longer enrolled in your district as of April 1 cannot be counted towards as an enrolled child. So again, if anybody drops out from your school, leaves, transfers, anything before April 1, they are not considered an enrolled student. So that, and then remember, if they probably will also not be on your direct cert list. So don't just always pull your rosters and be like, I have 55 kids, and same thing on your DC list, because it should have a drop date on there if any kids had left. Let's see. If the school has foster child papers on file because of enrollment, can I use those? If you can use those papers if it came from the state agency, because I know you can't get anything from a parent. So if it came from the parent, I don't know if that will work. You may need to send us a copy of that for us to look at to see if that would work. You have been on CEP and your percentages went down when you renewed. So do you have the problems of getting households to submit apps on provision 2 since they only fill it out every 4 years? Okay, so again, with provision 2, you may be on provision 2 for 20 years. They may not be filled. So CEP, you have to renew every 4 years. Provision 2, you do not have to. If your economic status is the same, based on this information that we get from the federal government, what they do is they pull this list and they look at what your information is for your provision the year that you had your base year. Is it done by base year? Is it the year they do their base year is what the numbers go by? Okay, it is done by the base year. And then they look at these percentages, they look at this documentation, and then it has to be within this percentage thing. It's a whole process, it's a formula. But if you're in that same area, then you do not have to redo a base year every 4 years. Now, like I said, we've had a lot of people that when the kids are free, you state to them, your kids are eating free this year, but we need to get these applications back, because if we don't get enough back, then we may have to go back to counting and claiming the next year. But CEP, you have to do a base year every 4 years. There's no exceptions. Provision 2, that's not the case. We did this past time have a few schools that were not, they had to redo a base year if they wanted to on provision 2, but it's not as common. What would you say out of all the provision schools, would you say 10% had to renew? Maybe. I have Nikki and Becky in here.
Probably, maybe a little bit more.
15, 20. So yeah, and some of it was due to COVID, but so let's see here. So that's the difference between the two. You don't have to renew a base year every 4 years like you have to with CEP. What about new enrollment between April 1st and the 7th? As long as they were there in April, but if they dropped before April, you cannot count that child in your, so if you have anybody that drops like March 30th, March 31st, they drop. So we are wanting your enrollment for April. So if they did come sometime in April, they should be on your enrollment list. If they dropped before April, they cannot be included in that, in your list. So how do you calculate the ISP? We get this question quite a bit. So it's your identified students divided by your enrolled students, and you multiply it by 100. So, and then I don't think the qualifier has ever changed. So what you do is once you get your ISP number, you multiply that by 1.6. So an example of that is, say, what the ISP does, you multiply it by the 1.6. So say your free rate is 59%. So 59% of your kids are on the direct cert list. You multiply it by 1.6, and so that equals 94.4. And then you take 100%, and then you minus the 94.4, and you get 5.6. So what that means is you would claim every month for the next 4 years, 94.4 will be percentage of your meal counts are going to be paid at the free rate, and 5.6% are going to be at the paid rate. There is no reduced. So that's something to think about. I don't have my calculator with me, but like if you're at 40% and you multiply that by the 1.6 factor, I think it comes up to like maybe 70%. So you'd only be claiming 70% free and the rest are paid. So if you have a lot of reduced kids, again, if you get a lot of kids that are free by application, CEP is not the way to go. Again, you tell us your total meal counts, and then for the next 4 years, every month, whatever your meal counts are, in this situation, if you were 59% based on your CEP numbers, for the next 4 years, you'll claim not whatever your meal counts are, 94.4% that month would be paid at the free rate, and 5.6, and I think it rounds, it would be at the paid rate. The CEP round, or does it go by this? I think it does too. So we'd technically be 94% and 6%. It's been so long since we had to do any of this. And if you are curious about what direct cert is, again, it's anything from SNAP. It's anything from a state agency. You would, on the wave, you would find SNAP and TANF. There's also FIDPER. I have heard that I had a consultant tell me that in her area, the tribes are also doing a TANF list. It'd be anybody on the homeless migrant runaway list from your district. Like that information comes from your district liaison. Again, if you could get anything foster from a state agency, if you get anything directly from the Head Start, if you have a Head Start at your school district, you would need to get that from them directly. And non-applicants approved by a local official. So again, it's just so it can't come from a parent. It can't come from the family. You're getting information that these families are free based on somebody else. I don't really see it as a lot in schools, but Sooner Care does not count as directly being certified. So if someone says, well, my kid's on Sooner Care, that in Oklahoma, that's not approved as free. That's under the free and reduced scale. So a lot of people do decide between the provision or CEP, what's the better for your school district. Again, the school may contact the state agency for an extension of provision after that 4 years. So you don't always have to redo a base year. You may be able to do an extension. And again, we have had some schools, like I said, I remember doing a couple of base years when I came in. They were in 1997 and they redid their base year like in 2008. So we've had some people using the same percentages for 20 years. The state agency may approve a 4-year extension, again, if the economic level of the school's population has remained stable. So if your area, and a lot of them tend to, but again, this past year, we had about 15% of all of those that are on provision 2 that we did tell them that they would have to reestablish a base year that year, which it's usually not very common. And then claiming percentages are based on applications, direct certification, and any other way that you approve. That's what a provision is. I just saw someone say, I apologize for the questions. No, that's why we're here, because we want to give people the best information that we can about provision. And also, and this is, so I talked to you about what provision is. Now this is community eligibility. You must reestablish a base year every 4 years. You don't have a choice. Extensions are not an option as they are in provision 2. Claiming percentages are based on direct certification only. And remember, in provision, your percentages are determined by your free kids based on direct certification, applications. However you approve your kids in a normal year, that's what it still applies in provision. Now, to participate, your site, group, or district must be at least 40% ISP. And again, it could be an alternative for schools with high percentages of children who are directly certified. So, and then the question, get my chat. When do they find out if they have to reestablish in provision 2? You guys have already done that, didn't you?
Yeah, we sent out letters.
So letters went out if you had to reestablish provision 2 in February. If you're interested in changing from CEP to provision 2, you would not. You have to do things completely different for provision 2 because they are 2 different programs. So, and then we'll talk about that too. So with CEP, CEP can be done by site. You can have a group, meaning you have like 5 elementary schools and the group together. This is what your average is for your free and reduced, or you can do it district-wide. Provision 2 is done by site. That's the only way to do it. Now, your whole school district can be on provision 2, but each time you do provision 2, it's done by site. So again, if you're deciding between the 2, I went back. So provision 2 and 3, there is no minimum requirement for free or reduced eligibles in order to participate. So like with CEP and provision 1, you have to meet a percentage. In provision 2, you could actually have, or 3, technically you could have no free kids and still be provision 2. That's why if you were like non-pricing and you're not charging your kids anyway, then do less paperwork and go on provision 2. Provision may be a good alternative for schools, again, with a high percentage of children that are free and reduced based on application. So, and again, I've been to some schools that have, and if you have a lot of, for your district, you have a high reduced rate, then you would probably want to do provision 2. So what happens at the end of the cycle? So provision, the agency will notify you, and they did that in February. If yes, the socioeconomic information will be checked to make sure your school does qualify for the extension. So they'll ask you if you want the extension, and then do you ask and then you look at the socioeconomic, or do you look at the socioeconomic first and then do that? And then in community eligibility, we will let you know. A lot of the times you guys know when you're going to be up in your 4 years for CEP. CARS will show you the school site's base year and how many years are left in your cycle. So if you go to provision 2, go to that site, your school site, and then scroll down to current year. And then with CEP, go to current year information and hit view details. So if you're not aware when your time changes, it will let you know then. Nikki, do you guys look at socioeconomic information before you send out the letter, or if they want the extension, then you look at?
Once they notify us that they want to on a school letterhead,
Okay.
then we will calculate it and let you know
If they qualify. So in February, what happened was they sent out letters for provision. And then if you want to still qualify, if you still want to continue your provision, then you send back on school letterhead that yes, you still want to continue provision with your original base year. And then they will look at your socioeconomic information to make sure that you qualify. So again, out of all of them that we have, I'm trying to think, do you know how many at the top of your hand schools we have on provision 2? No, it's hard too, since we haven't done this very often, but it's associated collected by CN. Okay, so the socioeconomic information, what we look at, it comes from the federal government. That doesn't have anything to do with your economically disadvantaged forms. So we have to look at something that the government provides us. And that's what we look at. We don't look at your economically disadvantaged forms at all. That has nothing to do with child nutrition. So when we talk about the socioeconomic, that has to do with a website with information that came from the federal government to let you know if you still qualify or not. It doesn't come from a school at all. We get our information from, I don't even know if it's USDA, but we do get it from another government entity, a federal government. Oh, it's from the Bureau of Labor. So that's where that information comes from. We get nothing from the school districts. So for provision 2, if you lose eligibility due to change in unemployment rate compared to your base year, can reapply and reestablish your base year. So yes, if you can, and I will talk about that too in here, but any of the provisions, you can always reestablish a base year at any point in time that you want to. And again, back in 2008, we had a lot of schools that had been on provision for, at that point, 20 years. We had a lot of people with their base year in the 90s, and a lot of them, because the economic change in their area, they all reestablished then. So even if, say, you have a base year and you did it 2 years ago, and then 2 years later, you want to reestablish your base year, you can do that. You can reestablish any base year at any point. If you no longer want to participate in any of these programs, the school district can you can decide to go back to standard counting and claiming at any point in time for CEP and at the end of the year for the other provisions. So we would say give it a little bit, because you have to give the parents time if you want to stop to get you applications. So we would definitely say 30 days. For CEP, but it has to be at the end of the year for provision. So you kind of have to go through that whole year. And you do need to let us know that you don't want to participate any longer in any of these. So you do collect applications for provision 2 like you would in any other normal year. You do it starting in August, July, August for that year. You do everything that you would normally do in a normal school year. You get applications starting in August. You do verification, you do all of the normal things that you would do. That's considered your base year, but still during that base year, your kids are still eating for free. You're just establishing your percentages. That's what the base year does. It establishes your percentages for as long as that you're on that provision. Now the district must start, if you don't want to do a provision or change a provision, you have to collect the family size and income applications. Eligibility must be determined. And again, you must count the meals as free, reduced, and paid at the point of service, just like you would do in a normal year if you no longer want to participate in a provision. So provision extension, we had about 10 to 15% that were denied this year. So if you got denied on provision 2 to having that extension, then you can either reestablish a base year. So go ahead in the next year, you'll go ahead and reestablish your base year, or you can go back to normal counting and claiming methods. Like I said, we normally don't see it, but we have seen like 10 to 15%, and we have quite a few schools that are on provision. Now with CEP, it changes to a student population could indicate a change in the poverty level of the household served by your school. It may require an ISP to be recalculated within that 4 years. So an example is, say your district-wide or group approval, and then you have a school that closes, and which we have had. If you have so we've had some of our larger districts close some schools for good, and that will make a big difference in your ISP. So no changes need to be made in the mid of the school year, but it would have to occur by the end of next year. So if you do have a big change in like your ISP, your enrollment and stuff, you would have to kind of reestablish. So what to do if your ISP does need to be recalculated, you would be again reestablishing that base year, or you could go back to counting and claiming. There is a deadline, and we'll talk about the deadlines for provision 2 and for CEP of letting us know when you want to do it. So with CEP in that fourth cycle, that year, the 4th year cycle, the ISP for new 4-year cycle must be established again using the most recent April data. Cycle extensions using the same base year information is not allowed with CEP as it is with Provision 2 or 3. So again, with Provision 2 or 3, the same base year, it can have an extension that does not apply in CEP. We do what we have called a grace year, and people get kind of confused about what a grace year is. If in your 4th year, your ISP is under 40%, but it is over the 30%. So remember, in CEP, you have to have 40% of your enrollment be directly certified. But maybe in your 4th year, it drops below that 40%, but it's higher than 30% as of April. Now, what happens is you may continue to participate in a 5th year for CEP. However, you cannot use your original year. You have to use the percentages that's below the 40%. So your percentages do change, but we're just letting you still participate one more year in CEP, but you don't get to use your original year's information. You have to use the lower numbers, which again, that could be like 60 to 70% free. And then you're looking at like 30 to 40% being paid at the paid rate. So you may just want to reestablish that base year. So for all provisions wanting to reestablish a base year, a school or site can reestablish again a new base year at any point in time, even during that cycle. It can be before the cycle ends, or it can be after this. I mean, like if say you're on it for 20 years, like a lot of them, and they reestablished after that, you can definitely do so. So let's talk about some additional information, and we'll talk about some of the deadlines. So it is still required that you have to do point of service. Like when we see this quite a bit. We saw it a lot with SSO too. It's a big no-no. So you're only allowed to count a child's meal at the point of service. So that is when that child receives their reimbursable meal. A point of service is not counting trays. A point of service is not using your attendance records. It's not a count from the classroom. A point of service is when that child receives a reimbursable meal. We've had a lot of issues with that, and a lot this year too with SSO. You're like, oh, well, here's the teacher's count of how many kids were in her class today. That's not a point of service. That's not a meal count. And again, you cannot force children to take a tray. So again, other things to consider is, again, all children, and I can't stress it enough, eat for free. They eat for free. You're not charging them for the meal. However, you still have to claim based on free, reduced, or paid, or free and paid if you're CEP. You still have to claim by that, even though the kids are not being charged. Something to consider else. So when people are talking about maybe wanting to go provision, this is the biggest thing that I tell them is, so when you were free, reduced, and paid, and your parents were giving you an application, how much money did you get in a school year from your paid kids and your reduced kids? So let's just say out of the year, between your paid kids and your reduced kids, they paid you $10,000 for their meals. If you go provision, you cannot collect funds from any child, so you would be losing that $10,000 that they originally paid in. And the district, you may have to pay back. Federal general fund may have to pay back child nutrition. So that's the biggest thing that people, so when I was in the field, I had some schools that were high, free, and reduced that they considered going provision. And my suggestion to them was, if they were 93%, I suggested provision. And then I asked them, how much money are you getting from your paid and your reduced kids? And they were like $15,000. I'm like, well, you will not be getting $15,000 from your local funds. So you would have to wipe that out. Now, I did have a school, they were not quite that high, free, and reduced, but I again asked them how much they were getting back reimbursement, or how much they were getting in from their free kids or reduced in their paid kids, and it was only like $2,000. And think about it though, think about the labor, because you're not paying somebody to, and you may have paid them out, like say child nutrition as well, but you're not paying somebody to every year to approve applications and do verification. So that does, you have to think about that too. Does the cost offset what a person would be doing for labor that they wouldn't have to be doing any longer? So again, look at that administrative cost. How much is it saving you? So with the school that only received $2,000 a year, it was a big, they're like, oh, it's definitely not worth my time. $2,000 that we were getting from our paid kids and reduced kids, it's definitely not worth my time to be doing applications every year. So it definitely offset for them. But sometimes, depending on how much money that you're getting, now you can still do a la carte. You can still do that. You just cannot charge a child for a reimbursable meal. But you can still do a la carte. You can still do that. Base your documentation. So base your documentation. Your documentation must be kept the duration that you are on that provision. So an example, if you are on provision 2 and you're on provision 2 for 20 years, you have to keep that base your information for 20 years. We can look at that paperwork at any time. It has happened that you can't find that documentation. If that documentation cannot be found, then you are required to reestablish a base year. You can no longer do provision if you lose that documentation, because we will come out and ask to see it. So just kind of a reminder. Now with CEP, you have to keep it for 4 years because that's the only time you can do it. But if you're on provision for 20 years. You have to keep that paperwork for 20 years. And that is what happened. Is we did have some schools that we came out, we're like, where's your paperwork? And they're like, I don't know. So we told them you can't be on this provision anymore. You have to reestablish a base year because you have no paperwork. How do you apply for provision? Provision 2 and provision 3, you do have to be approved by site. CEP, it's done by site, group, or district wide. A provision application does have to be filled out. So you would contact our office and you do have to let us know by August 1st that you want to do provision 2 or 3. And it's just a 1-page paper application. It's really easy. CEP and CARS is where you'll fill out the application for CEP. And you have to do it by June 30th. But I would always tell you to, if you think that you want to go provision, also contact your program specialist and let them know. For a couple of reasons. One, they have to come out eventually to look at the paperwork. But 2, they may even give you some helpful suggestions about which way to go because they've been in your school before. So definitely let your consultant / program specialist let them know that you're wanting to go on it. Yes, so that's another good question. And we do actually have schools that already do this. We do have some schools that one site is on CEP and other sites are on provision 2. So you can do that as well. Because we have some schools, again, that maybe, we have one school in particular that all their elementaries and their middle school, they're a group and they're CEP, but their high school, they're not high enough to do CEP. So they did provision 2, but you can definitely, you can mix and match. We do have some that are on there that are that way. So you can definitely have one site on provision and another site on CEP. That is allowable. Community eligibility approval, I need to change that, your consultant / program specialist, we will verify your direct certification and rosters. No matter what, your program specialist is going to have to, do the ultimate approval. Documentation will be validated for everything. So just a reminder, when you print your DC list and you print your rosters or your enrollment, your program specialist has to validate all that. That's where your final numbers will come from, is from your program specialist. And it's the same thing with provision 2, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. If you have a child that does transfer, if a student transfers from a provision school to a non-provision school within the same district, then that child can have free meals up to 30 days. We're giving that family 30 days to give you an application for that child. And the same thing does go for a student transferring to a different district. What we ask is that the school where the child is coming from, they need to get a letter from that school. So let's say you have green district and purple district. And green district is a provision school, say it's CEP, and purple district is not. So green school would need to give, it's like on letterhead, just saying this child was at our school and we participate in CEP. So anyway, to let them know that they are free for the first 30 days, and then school purple can get an application from that child. And then again, I told you the resources that we have. We get all of our information from these two. This is the guidance for provision 2. It also has provision 3 in here as well. And then we have CEP. Provision 2, there was one thing I was going to mention about that. Let me go back 2 slides. I thought I had another slide in here about it. Okay, so how it kind of works with provision 2. So you have to let your consultant know, your program specialist, that we're going to come out. We'd like to know, preferably the earlier the better, especially for CEP, because we will have to get your information. We would like your rosters to be, as long as it's in April, we're fine whenever your rosters are printed. It doesn't have to be the same date as your direct cert list, but they both need to be done in April because it needs to reflect April information. With provision 2, let your, so with CEP, between now, like whenever you start pulling your data, let your program specialists know that you want to be on CEP, pull your data, you'll need to send it to them, they'll let you know, and they're going to look at everything to make sure what your percentages are, because you may say this is what my percentages are, but your program specialist is the one who's going to have the final information. And you want to do it quickly as possible because maybe it didn't end up being as high as you thought it would be. And so maybe you want to go provision 2. Provision 2, what will happen is in your base year, your program specialist is going to come out in November. And the reason why for November is because it's after you've done verification, and they're going to look at every single application, your direct cert list, your home list. They're going to look at everything that you approved a child for and make sure it's all correct before they can let you be on provision 2. Yes, so your program specialist is your consultant. We changed the name. They're no longer referred to as consultant because that's not really their job. You usually pay a consultant, but your program specialist is the person that does your reviews, because that's what they are. They're a child nutrition program specialist. They're the ones that do your reviews. That is who they are. So you need to let your person who does your reviews, your consultant / program specialist, know that you want to do one of these. And again, they'll come out in November. They're going to make sure that every application was approved correctly. Don't freak out if you have a couple of applications. It happens during a review that maybe you have a couple applications you approved for free, but they should have been reduced. We're going to tell you to correct it. And don't claim. We're going to have you, you can claim, but we're going to have you revise your claim if your numbers are off, if your free and reduced percentages are off. And then we'll approve that you be on provision 2 or provision 3. So, but if you could let them know that way they can work it into their schedule and already have it in there, would be fantastic. So I hope we did answer some of your questions. Do you have any other questions that we can definitely answer? Because it does sound like we got a lot of really good questions. We haven't done this in several years. I'm even like, how do we do provision again? Because it's been so long, because we've had some schools I know very interested in doing provision, but we couldn't do provision when you're not on the school lunch program. You have to be on the school lunch program because that's where your base year numbers come from, is from your school lunch meals. So if you're not doing the school lunch program, then you couldn't do provision. That's why we haven't done it in so long. And no patience needed. This is why we're here. This is why we're doing this, to give you all the information so you guys can maybe make a better decision of what's best for your district. Because I think some people, they thought one way was best for their district, and then come to find out it may not be the best for their district to have the highest percentage of free and reduced and paid, or just free and paid. But a lot of people also think that just because the kids eat for free, that you claim for free, and that's never the case. With any of the provisions. If that was the case, then every school would have been on provision always. So just make sure And again, you can, when you start the year, even if you're on provision 2, if you want to do provision 2 or CEP, all the kids have to eat for free automatically from the beginning of the year. So you may get your information. That's why if you let us know immediately that you want to do it, and we can look at your information, because you may, like I said, I had a school that went CEP. They wanted to do CEP. They thought they qualified. They did not qualify. So then they did change it to provision 2 because they let us know in enough time. But maybe you'll get your information and be like, it's not high enough. And then you want to go back to regular standard counting and claiming. So you do need to make sure that you let everybody know in enough time, so that way we can give you your information so you can make the best of it. Do you guys have anything else that needs to be discussed? All right, well, thank you guys so much for coming today. I really appreciate it. I know Nikki and Becky really help it. Nikki is the one who gets to do fund provision stuff. So if you do have any other questions, you can definitely reach out to her as well. We're gonna stay on for just a couple more minutes, but you guys are free to go. We'll send you out certificates probably by tomorrow, if not by the end of the week. So have a great day. Enjoy this beautiful windy weather.